Yoni and use the mobile microphone. Can everyone hear me? Now, this topic might seem very specific, but it connects to every single one of the previous presentations. It connects to the issue of indigenous peoples because the historic presence, the historic rights of the Inuit are part of Canada's legal claim to the Northwest Passage. It connects to China and shipping interests, as Zhang was talking about, because China, as the world's largest shipping state, has a very significant interest in Arctic waterways. It connects, obviously, to climate change, because climate change is what is causing the sea ice to become thinner, to recede, and therefore creating the possibility of commercial shipping through these Arctic waterways. It connects, obviously, to great power responsibility because we're talking about China, Russia, the United States, and Canada. Canada is not a great power, but it is a great Arctic power. It connects to geopolitics in every imaginable way. But the central issue is how will China move forward in terms of international diplomacy and international law into a region where there are coastal countries, coastal states that have long established claims and have a territorial presence. And here this issue of how China will enter the Arctic, whether it will enter in a spirit of cooperation or in a spirit of competition, is central to my discussion. So let's move forward here. This is another of many maps of the Arctic that you have seen today. I just want to point out that there are 3 Arctic shipping routes. The one that is most accessible at the moment is the Northern Sea Route along the coastline of Russia. And it's important to point out that at several places, including here, this is the Vilchilsky Straits, the waterway is less than 24 nautical miles across. And this enables Russia to claim these narrow straits as Russian internal waters. There's one country that disputes that, the United States of America. On the other side of the Arctic, you have the Northwest Passage through here, and there are several spots that are less than 24 nautical miles across, and this enables Canada to claim that these are Canadian internal waters, subject to the full force of Canadian law. And there is one country that explicitly opposes Canada's position, and that is the United States. So I've written before about Russian-Canadian cooperation in both these disputes with regards to the United States, but only now am I thinking about China in this context. Oh, the other strait, just so you know, the other shipping route is across the middle, but that is coming later, and hopefully if we can stay below 2 degrees Celsius, that will not become a real option. But the other 2 options are real already in the late summer and fall. So again, there's a dispute between the United States and Russia. This became a dispute in 1965, where the United States sent a Coast Guard icebreaker, and that icebreaker turned around when the Soviet Union threatened a physical response. And so there has never been an unauthorized surface voyage through the Russian Arctic Straits. There have undoubtedly been submarines, but submarines are covert, and covert actions cannot change international law. The international strait, the position of the United States, turns on the waterway connecting 2 parts of the high seas. In the case of the Northern Sea route, that is the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. In the case of the Northwest Passage, it is the Atlantic Ocean and the Arctic Ocean north of Russia. Sorry, north of Alaska. But this is the question, and whether or not it has been used for international navigation. And Canada says no, it hasn't, because historically it's been blocked by thick sea ice. Also the Russian position. We had a physical challenge in the Northwest Passage in 1969, where this supertanker that was owned by Exxon sailed through the passage without asking permission. Canada, in a very interesting diplomatic move, gave permission, even though it was not requested. And we sent an icebreaker to help, and the icebreaker was essential. It actually freed this ship from the ice on 12 different occasions. So we take the view that this was a consensual voyage. The Americans disagree. Now, in 1982, Russia and Canada partnered diplomatically to come up with a regime for ice-covered waters in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. I won't dwell on this, but it shows that there's cooperation between countries that have similar positions on these issues. And in 1985, when we had a second non-consensual voyage through the Northwest Passage by the US Coast Guard in this question, the Soviet Union came to Canada's defense, supported Canada's position. And this again was in 1985. It was still the Cold War. This was a big deal. So countries that don't normally cooperate can cooperate on common interests like this. And Canada drew straight baselines around its Arctic islands, which is part of strengthening its claim. And then in 1988, we agreed to disagree with the United States to keep that dispute, that specific dispute, frozen. Pun is intentional. Now, last summer, the US Coast Guard wanted to send a ship through the Northwest Passage, and what we do in these instances is we give them permission, but what we do is we give them permission to conduct scientific research, because you need permission to conduct scientific research regardless of whether it is internal waters or an international strait. So this is a nice way of getting around the dispute. They want to send a ship through, we say, well, ask for permission to conduct scientific research. They ask, we grant permission, and everyone pretends there's no dispute. Happens all the time between Canada and the United States. Last summer, the Chinese icebreaker, the Sulong, the Snow Dragon, wanted to sail through the Northwest Passage, conducting scientific research. And they came to Canada, and Canada said, well, ask for permission to conduct scientific research. Then we don't need to discuss whether it is an international strait or internal waters. Just ask for scientific research permission, which they did. And this is Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister saying that, that this was exactly what happened, reported in Canada's national newspaper. So the Chinese government has decided to take the same approach of avoiding the dispute. And China has not taken an explicit position on the dispute. It is choosing not to engage with the legal issue. And my question for you is, why is it choosing not to? Because people assume that China, as the world's largest shipping strait, will want to have total freedom of access to the Northwest Passage and to the Northern Sea route. So why wouldn't they side with the United States? Well, here's one reason. This is Hainan Island. This is the Chinese mainland. This is, and I don't know how to pronounce it, the Guangzhou, the Hainan Strait. This is less than 24 nautical miles across. China takes the position, and has taken the position for half a century, that this here strait is Chinese internal waters. There's one country that disputes that, the United States of America. The United States says, no, no, this is an international strait. And the Chinese claim, and I've done extensive research on this, goes all the way back to the 1950s, saying that it is internal waters based upon historical use. It's a very powerful position. It's identical to the Canadian and Russian legal positions. Absolutely identical, including the drawing of straight baselines, like the ones I showed you on the Canadian map. And this is where it is up here. So it is completely separate from the legal disputes in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. Completely separate, and it involves different legal issues. This is international strait versus internal waters. This is about the 9-dash line and about the status of rocks and artificial islands. Similar issues up in the East China Sea. So my point here is that China, if it were to explicitly oppose Canada or Russia in their legal disputes, would be creating a negative precedent. It would be causing legal damage to its own position here. And Canada and Russia can accept Chinese legal support in the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route without involving any of the complicated issues down here and up there. It's a perfect example of where China's legal position not only is identical to Canada's and Russia's, but where China has a national interest in supporting Canada and Russia in their legal disputes with the United States. Final thing to say is that it's not just about the law. The Arctic is a cold, dark, dangerous place. It is very large. It is very remote. A Chinese ship or a non-Chinese ship that is sailing to or from China with cargo is going to be many thousands of kilometers away from China when it is in the Northwest Passage or the Northern Sea Route. And there is only one country that can provide support: search and rescue, right? Provide maintenance for mechanical repairs, provide ports of refuge. There's only one country along the Northwest Passage that can do that. That's Canada, just like there's only one country along the Northern Sea Route. So you have ice, and the climatologists will perhaps know that this is not sea ice, this is glacial ice. This is what's called a growler or a bergy bit. It's a small iceberg. And the sea ice is melting. But at the same time, climate change is causing the glaciers to move more quickly into the ocean. So we're actually seeing more glacial ice in the Northwest Passage. This ice is thousands of years old. It's hard. It's like concrete. And a small piece can punch a hole right through a ship. So when the Chinese ships come, there's going to always be a risk from glacial ice, and that's one of the reasons why they will need Canadian or Russian support. Another thing is that when the ice melts, you still have a threat from ice that can form on the surface of a ship. This is called icing. So you have open water. The water is 1 degree Celsius. And the air temperature might be minus 20 degrees Celsius, and you have a big storm and lots of wind, and all of the spray freezes on top of the ship. This is very dangerous. It can become very heavy, and it can cause ships to overturn and sink. So even an ice-free, in quotation marks, ice-free Arctic is a dangerous, icy Arctic. Just different kinds of ice. And China will need Canadian and Russian support to make these Arctic shipping routes work. And search and rescue, I've already mentioned. If you have a Chinese ship that gets into trouble in the middle of the Northwest Passage, this is what will rescue the crew. This is a long-range maritime search and rescue helicopter. It's too far from China for anyone else, too far from anyone else to expect an alternative form of search and rescue. And the same is true in terms of on the ocean. If you have a ship that becomes stuck in the ice, you're going to need an icebreaker to come and rescue it. In the Northern Sea route, it will be a Russian icebreaker. In the Northwest Passage, it will be a Canadian one. So again, two reasons why China should support Canada and Russia on these disputes. One of them is a legal reason, the issue of avoiding a negative precedent. So sharing the position of Canada and Russia vis-a-vis the United States. There's a wonderful tripartite alignment between the three countries. And the second issue simply concerns the fact that the Arctic is cold, dark, and dangerous, and will stay cold, dark, and dangerous. So any ships that go there will need Canadian or Russian support. And that is why I believe that China has not taken a legal position on the status of the Northern Sea route or the Northwest Passage. Thank you.